Hello and welcome to this video. So we have been talking about quadratic equations. We have learned how to solve quadratic equations by several methods. We have looked at factorization method. We have looked at completing the square method. And now I want us to get into another common method that is known as the quadratic formula. So I want us to learn how to derive the quadratic formula and how to apply it to solve a quadratic equation. So we are going to use the knowledge on completing the square method, and also factorization method. Okay. So let's say we have a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Okay. So a and b are coefficients. Okay. A is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is a constant. So I want us to use the completing the square method to try and find the values of x. So now the first thing that we are going to do, I'm going first to divide through by a that way. Okay, so that I'm going to have x squared plus b over ax plus c over a is equal to 0. So if you recall the completing the square method, but if you did not watch that video, I'm going to leave a link to it in the description box so that if you never watched that video, you can get to follow that link and watch that video. So we said that using the completing the square method, the first thing that we're going to do is to move this constant to this other side. And how are we going to do it? We're going to subtract minus c over a on both sides. Okay. So we're going to have, or our equation is now going to be x squared plus b over ax is equal to negative c over a. So you see that I've left some space here. Okay. So this means that we need to get the value of c to make the left hand side of the equation a perfect square. So all this we mentioned in that video. So you need, or I would suggest that you first watch that video on how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square method before you watch this equation, because we are going to base most of our knowledge on that particular video. So once again, the link is in the description box. If you never have happened to watch it, you can follow that link. Okay, so we said that to get the value of c here, we use the formula b. Okay, b represents the coefficient of x. Okay, in this case it's b out of a. So b represents the coefficient of x, but for this case the coefficient of x is b out of a. So it's going to be b out of a, that is the coefficient of x, squared, or rather divided by 2. Let me write it this way. Squared, we are supposed to get AC, and since A is 1, it's going to be C only. Okay, or rather, as you can see here, A is 1, so we don't have to write it there. So C is going to be, so B over A divided by 2 is the same as B over A times a half. Okay, so which can also be rewritten as b out of 2a. So when we square these, we are supposed to get the value of c. So that means c is b squared all over 4a squared. So we can write our equation now and include c. So it's going to be x squared plus b out of a x plus c, which is now b squared minus 4a squared is equal to negative c out of a. Okay, so we said that to make the equation remain balanced, we are going to add, since we have added b squared over 4a squared on this side, we need also to add the same b squared over 4a squared to this other side to make the equation remain balanced. Okay, so then after that, we are going to factorize the left hand side of this equation. So this one now, the left hand side of this equation is now a perfect square. And in that video, I showed you a technique, or a simple technique, that we use to factor a perfect square, okay, instead of using the long factorization method. And that way, I told you that you need to find the square root, or you can have these. You need to find the square root of this one, which is x. You need to find the square root of this one, which is b out of 2a. And then this sign that is in between x squared and b out of ax, you place it there. Okay, so I remember showing you this in that video. So once again, if you never happened to watch that video, there is a link for you in the description box below. So we have factorized that, the left hand side of this equation. So we can have that is equal to negative c. Okay, now I want us to combine this, and we are going to use we are going to make it under a common denominator. Okay, so we can have the LCM as 4a squared, then 4a squared divided by a, we're going to have 4a, and then minus, and then times negative c. So it's going to be minus 4ac. Okay, and then plus 4a squared, and 4a squared is going to cancel out, so we're going to remain with b squared. Okay, so now we need to get the value of x. Okay, but first we need to eliminate this squared. And how do we eliminate it? We eliminate it by getting the square root of both sides that way, so that on the left hand side, the squared and the square root will cancel out, and we are going to be left with x plus b out of 2a is equal to, now let's come to the right hand side. At the top, we cannot get the square root of each one of them, so it's going to remain as, or rather I can even rearrange it to be b squared minus 4ac, but even if you don't rearrange it, there is no problem. And then on the denominator, we can get the square root. Remember, this big square root covers both the numerator and the denominator, but we can get directly the square root of the denominator, which is 2a. Okay, so now we have that equation. Okay, remember, we are getting the value of x. Okay, by the way, there's something I've forgotten, very important. When you are getting the square root of any number, you can either get a positive or a negative. So you can either get a positive or a negative. Okay, that way. So we now need to be left with x on this side only. So what does that mean? We need to take this to this other side. So we can subtract minus b over 2a on both sides, so that on the right hand side we are going to have, or rather when it comes to the right hand side, it will be negative b out of 2a, and then plus or minus b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So you can see that on the right hand side we have a common denominator. So what does that mean? We can get, or we can put this together such that it will be under a common denominator, that is 2a. Okay, so 2a divided by 2a is 1. So 1 times negative b, it's negative b, and then plus or minus the square root of, okay, so 2a by 2a is 1, so it's going to be, it will remain as b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so now, what we have now, which is the value of x, is what we call the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula. So we have derived the quadratic formula. So we can now use it to solve any quadratic equation that you are given. So for example, let's say we have a quadratic equation, x squared, or rather let me say 2x squared, or rather let me have 4x squared instead of 2. So let's have 4x squared plus 9x plus sorry, not 9x, but okay, let me have 12x plus 9 is equal to 0. Okay, and we are asked to use the quadratic formula to get the value of x. I know you can also use other methods, the factorization method and completing the square method, but for this case, let's use the quadratic formula just to see whether it's going to work. Okay, so the quadratic formula, as you can see, we need to get the value of b, or we need to identify b on this equation. Okay, we need to identify b. We also need to identify a, and we need to identify c. So from this equation, what is a? So a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 4. b is the coefficient of x, which is 12. And c is the constant, which is 9. So once you have identified all those values, so we need to apply them into our formula. Okay, so let me write it down here once again. So it's x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac out of 2a. Okay, so let's apply these values into our formula. Okay, so it's going to be, the value of x is going to be minus b, so b is 12, then plus or minus the square root of b squared. So b is 12, so 12 squared is 144, minus, so I suggest that you put a bracket, because 4ac is one thing. Okay, so that you don't get confused, you can put a small bracket. So we can have 4 times a is 4 times c, which is 9. Okay, that way, and then divided by 2a, and a is 4, so it's 4 times 2, which is 8. So we can work this out. So it's going to be negative 12 plus or minus. Okay, so let's work out whatever is inside this bracket. It's 4 times 4, 16 times 9. So 16 times 9 is, we have 54, and then 9, and so it's 144. So it's 144 minus So here, this one is also 144. So that is going to be 0. So 144 minus 144 is 0. And then the square root of 0 remains 0. So all this is 0. So that means x is minus 12 plus or minus 0 over 8. So plus or minus 0 is 0. So x is going to be negative 12 out of 8, which can be simplified further into, so we can have by 4 it's 3, by 4 it's 2. So x is negative 3 out of 2. So you can try to replace x with negative 3 out of 2 and see whether you will get, or rather this equation is going to hold. So we have just looked at one example, but I really wished that we would look at more examples, but I can see that time is really not on my side. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create another video where we shall only look at examples of equations and how to apply this quadratic formula to solve each and every one of them. So let's meet in that video, but for now, goodbye and have a nice time. Thank you for watching.